Greetings, I'm Maggie Moon. Thank you for joining me today, where I am going to be having an interview with someone that I admire greatly. I'm so very happy to have the opportunity to interview D.H. Thorn. Welcome, D.H. Thank you so very much for being here.
Hey Maggie, how's it going? First of all, I want to really thank you for inviting me to do these questions with you.
And I truly appreciate your time. For those who may be new to the left-hand path, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm a self-published author, and I'm very successful at it so far. It's actually allowed me to become self-employed after being kind of a work-a-day, 9 to 5, blue-collar, white-collar, different kinds of jobs, never really having a career or a purpose in life because I was never happy with the mundane. I was always had my head in the clouds, either in the spiritual, the sciences, the science fiction, the fantasy. I was always a dreamer and an artist, and it was never really fun for me to put my nose to the grindstone and make other people happy. I can't stand working for other people on their dreams and leaving my dreams in the dust where I can't do anything with them because I've got to spend time working on everybody else's plans and dreams. So in 2018, I basically decided that I would begin becoming public with what I do. And I had stopped doing this stuff for quite a while. I had stopped doing magic actively. I had become sort of a skeptical atheist for a little while. But when I came back into magic, it came back to me as if I had never stopped. In fact, I knew things that I didn't know when I was younger. It was almost as if I had awakened something in my DNA and I remembered something. Perhaps a past life, perhaps something else. And it allowed me to excel in what I was doing in ways that I never could have done when I was younger. I immediately started doing pacts with demons and other spirits to give me a chance to become famous and to become a well-known author and occultist that people would respect and work with. And I could share my gnosis and actually help the spirits that I was learning to love and become friends with to have their story and message put out there in a way that would help them. Now, I am not a theist, if that makes sense. I do not have gods that I worship. I don't work that way. I am truly a Luciferian in the sense that I do not believe in gods, but I do believe in spirits. I do believe in disembodied entities. I do believe in beings that we can commune with, that the ancients would have called gods, and we can interact with them. We can teach things to ourselves through them. We can manifest our desires with them. They can teach us to do true magic by ourselves. And the truest magic comes from within. It comes from within you. It comes from within your own imagination, your own ability to conceive a reality that you want. Real magic is really just the art of taking your higher self's intentions and manifesting it in your ego-driven experience, which is not a bad thing. A lot of people talk bad about ego, but I don't. I think you need to embrace your ego as if it's the most beautiful part of your expression of life in this world, because it is the way you interface with the material world. It's something to be proud of, so long as you don't let it go to your head. You see, the ego is the jester that sits on the throne, and it's not really the king, but it acts like him. So you just have to be careful. Let that ego jester entertain you and let him wear the mask for you. But when it comes time to really be you, you have to make sure you're the one wearing the crown, not the jester. So that's kind of how I live my life. And my first book, Become the Maelstrom, was a huge success. It is a complete work of magic. It is something that a total beginner can pick up and can learn a completely non-dogmatic, esoteric, metaphysical, and eclectic system of magic, so that there's a lot that's drawn on. I do not invoke things like the Qliphoth, the Sephiroth. I don't work with the Kabbalah. I don't work with the Kabbalion. I don't work with any of those things. However, I do base my fundamental philosophy and metaphysics on non-dualism, Neoplatonism, Platonic stuff from Plato, quite obviously, and a little bit of Hermetics, just a little bit. So my understanding of metaphysics is quite high, and it shows in what I do, because I believe that is the source of magic. That is the source of what we do. Magic is really applied metaphysics. Metaphysics would be the science that everyone talks about magic in a way. And magic itself is the technology. Magic is the way we express in an artistic way what our metaphysical truth is. When you understand it that way, you can go and leap ahead of everybody, because you realize it's not a matter of just getting the right colored rocks and crystals and candles and using the right incense and saying the right words. You recognize that those are symbols, and the reason that they are symbols is something very deep and powerful. And when you can contact that deepness and that powerful thing, You can ride your broomstick, so to speak, in the astral. You can enter into that trance state. You can go places in your mind that you couldn't before. And when you're doing it right, you're going to feel like you're not causing reality to do what you want. You're going to feel like reality has no choice. It's already doing what must be. And you are part of that process. You are the hand of God manifesting that which you are, because you are God. And that's what I hang my hat on, and that's where Lucifer comes in, because Lucifer teaches us to not follow that right-hand path of submission where we submit and worship other gods. We don't submit and try to make ourselves like them and become them and fill their kingdoms and their heavens with our presence. No, instead, our job is to identify ourselves as God, either because we're going to make ourselves into a God, which I don't think is necessary, or because we recognize we are God. We are already the master of our world. And if we are the master of our world, then there can be no God higher than us. And so therefore we are our own divinity. Lucifer is a being that can be traced back through many different generations and cultures. Some people would say he's related to Venus and to Phosphorus and Horus, going back to Egypt. I personally prefer to see him as Enki, and Ea later on was his name. Other people would identify him as Loki, but he is really the archetype of rebellion, the archetype of liberation, individuality, a little bit of tricksterness, but certainly the wise mystic on the mountain that teaches you who you really are and what you're about. And that is why I use him, not as my patron by any means. I don't follow any spirit, but that's probably why he's called me one of his chosen, because I refuse to follow. I refuse to be a person that kneels and worships and prays to a god of any kind, even the pagan ones. Rather, I work with them as equals. I see myself as one of them, except I am in an embodied state and they are not. That is the difference. And when we work together, we can manifest reality, because I have control over this level in my immediate surroundings. I'm a god of my body in this world. They're a god of that astral space, and together we can interact and create a reality that can manifest not just our dreams. You have to recognize your dreams are already manifestations. They're already things that are happening. They're already in motion. You just have to allow yourself to be drawn into them. You just have to relax in that Wu Wei way, as we talked about as I talk about a lot in Taoist studies. So let yourself go. Find out you are the world. You are the universe. You are causality. Don't give in, but become that, and use that to manifest the things not that your ego desires, because that's a trap. You need to learn what your higher self truly desires, so that it remains the king on the throne, and the ego, as the jester, doesn't take over. So that's probably a good way to start talking about me. So yeah. Nice to meet you, Maggie. I'm really having a good time.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us. In your recent blog entry, Guilt, a Luciferian Perspective, I really found that those words were so very powerful, and it gave me a lot of food for thought. I was quite quiet for the rest of the evening after I had read that, because I went into deep introspection. I really enjoy discussions like that, exploring things that make us uncomfortable, because I truly feel that it is through the struggle that we transform and evolve. If we never challenge ourselves, we're just going to, stay at that plateau. And I was hoping that you could briefly discuss that with us.
So what is guilt? Guilt is a thing that really magnifies our ego. And I've said many times, there's nothing wrong with being an ego, having an ego. The problem is when you forget, when you mistake yourself for that ego. You are not an ego. You have an ego. And that ego is just a story. And that story is a thing that you and others have made up. It's literally an egregore. And if you don't know what an egregore is, I suggest you look it up. But it's a very powerful spiritual concept. Your ego, the person you think you are, the name that you inhabit, so to speak, the name that you use as an interface with reality, is an egregore. And it was created by you and everybody else to represent your ability to interface between your world and others. This egregore has a story running for it. It has a story of, I was born here, my name was this. On March 3rd, I did that. And I did this thing that I'm proud of, and this thing that I'm ashamed of, and this thing that I'm supposed to feel guilt for. Well, guilt is a selfish emotion, ultimately. It is realistically not what people think. People often think, I feel so guilty. Unfortunately, guilt is a way for us to not take action. It's actually a way for us to deny that we actually have to do anything. We feel like we're punishing ourselves in a lot of cases. Now, I get it. A lot of times people will use guilt as a motivator. They'll say, I feel really guilty. I got to go out and I got to fix a problem, right? So let me give you an example. This is probably the best way to explain my understanding of guilt. Let's say you and your friend have an argument and you were in the wrong, okay? When you feel guilty about it, that can either make you ashamed and unwilling to reach out to your friend and make things right, or that can make you feel ashamed and you reach out to your friend and try to make things right. The problem is, in both of those circumstances, you're not actually fixing the problem. You're literally just alleviating your sense of guilt. So if I reach out to my friend and say, listen, I'm sorry, man, I know that what I did was wrong, can you forgive me? Are we really seeking to make amends, or are we seeking instead to make ourselves feel better? Now, the problem with this is it's not very Luciferian. It's not very liberated. A liberated person doesn't feel guilt. They don't feel shame the same way other people do. See, the left-hand path is really about not having any kind of taboo. That's a big part of it. It's not the central focus, but it's kind of like the first emanation of the idea of the left-hand path, which is complete and utter liberation and individuality. The first emanation must be a cessation of the thinking of taboos. You can no longer believe in the idea of taboo. You have to understand that anything you will is your divine right to do and believe. And when you do that, when you have that understanding, it's a lot easier to manifest your reality, to be a living God, to be a God in a living body, to have that experience. It's a lot easier. That doesn't mean there's no rules. It doesn't mean you don't have any sense of right and wrong. It doesn't mean you lose your empathy. You're not a narcissistic psychopath. None of that happens. But you get rid of this idea that you must behave a certain way or else feel guilty. And if you find yourself feeling guilt, instead of trying to remove the feeling of guilt, instead of doing that, you take action which is justified and is within your will. Because guilt really is a way to make ourselves a victim in another way. You see, it's one thing to blame the world and say, I never went to college because my parents couldn't save up enough, and maybe I had this thing happen, that made it, maybe I had bad grades, my teacher didn't like me. It's really easy to blame the world, right? It's a way to put off doing things yourself. It's a way to hide from the reality and responsibility of your actions. Well, guilt is not unlike that. It's a way for you to put pain into an externalized way. It allows you to say, well, I feel really bad about what I did. I feel really bad about what I did, but you don't change the thing you did. That's the difficult part, is changing what you did. You can't go back in time. You can't take back something that you did that you believe is wrong. You can ask for forgiveness and feel relieved that people aren't mad at you anymore, true. But that doesn't really change what you did. You can never change that. So the answer to the question of guilt is to avoid it. Simply don't try to become someone who uses guilt as a motivator. When you sense yourself beginning to feel guilt, change the primary cause of that guilt. And that usually is forgiving yourself. It's letting go of that sense of guilt, understanding that you are a perfect divine being. There's no such thing as a mistake. It doesn't happen. You are a God, and the world you're manifesting right now is always according to your desire and will. I know a lot of people have a hard time believing that, especially when they're caught up in their ego lie, when they're caught up in the story of who they are. They think, this person hurt me, it's not fair. You don't realize that you manifested that as well, because you are them and they are you. And this whole thing is manifested by that same source that you are. You're not merely a separate emanation, like you're coming off of source and you're separate. You are that source. Lucifer is that source. All of these things are. This is why Lucifer rebels against beings that try to pretend that they are a god of others. It rebels against beings that say, well, I am your Lord and God. Well, I would never say that to you. I would say, I'm my Lord and God. And if I dominate you, it's because you let me. You don't realize it. I'm here as a force of nature to do what I do. So therefore, I am not part of that paradigm of control and slavery and injustice and things. Even if I act in a way that is perhaps rude or arrogant or domineering sometimes, I recognize that that's not what I am. I am a puppet that is being manifested by the source. I'm an egregore. I am a being that thinks it's itself, but it's not. And so my ego takes a back seat. Even though I let it run free, I hide behind that ego. I wear it like a mask. It's my egregore self. I recognize, however, the D.H. Thorn and whoever else I might go by at the given time is just how I'm acting so that I can get through this world to see the next chapter of what experience is. Because The real purpose of you being here is to experience bliss. And that bliss is happening all the time. You just have to get rid of everything that gets in your way from seeing it. So if you want to read more about my understanding of guilt, it is definitely, not for everybody. I have to give you some reader discretion. I do talk about some rather tricky topics in there. Hopefully you understand my perspective and don't make assumptions about me over them. They have to be said, especially in the current climate of things in the world. So you can go to my blog, and it's called, you can find it easily at www.mindtheshadows.com. Click on the sitemap page, and everything is there. If you scroll down, you'll see all of my posts from oldest to newest in that order, and it will be the problem with guilt. And hopefully you will find that an interesting read. But remember, viewer discretion is advised. It's not for everybody. Most of my work is not for children, absolutely never. And it is not for people who are sensitive to being triggered by ideas that maybe they're not able to handle. Everything I do rubs against and pushes against what we think of as taboo without being unethical. And that's something I have to be very clear about, because it has a lot to do with guilt. I am not a moralistic person in the slightest. However, I do have very, very well developed ethics of what I think is noble behavior for a human being to participate in. And it's very much like the golden rule in a lot of ways. However, I'm also not a pushover. I don't turn my cheek. Neither should you.
Yes, always great food for thought. Thank you for that. One of the things that I love the most about Luciferianism is that it is really up to the individual to sculpt and create their own path. You have to do things in a way that are personally meaningful, and I mean personally meaningful to the core. I love that freedom. And you had mentioned in one of the interviews I was watching with you, you had mentioned that you have found great meaning in Zen and Luciferianism. A blend of the two together seems to work really well for you. I was hoping that you could discuss that, and also maybe discuss the importance of creating and cultivating your own practice.
So my understanding of Zen is my own. I never went to a temple. I never became a priest. I never shaved my head. I never did any of that stuff. However, I did listen to a bunch of Alan Watts videos once and found out that these were things I already believed, things that I had already figured out intuitively growing up. And he put them in ways for me that helped me to manifest them as my own belief, so to speak. I adopted, I resonated with them, and I realized that they were non-dogmatic. They were very open. They were metaphysical and philosophical ideas that applied to everything. And I come to learn that most of what Alan Watts spoke about was inspired by, Chan Buddhism, which is Zen, which is the origin of Zen. Now, Zen, I am not a master of understandings. I don't know Zen back to front. A lot of Zen people would watch my stuff and say, that's not Zen at all. Though I might argue that maybe they don't know the meaning of what Zen is if they really find flaw in what I'm saying. But generally speaking, I believe that it's everybody's duty. It is your job, it's your experience, it is your right, and it is your calling, especially if you're into spirituality, to make it your own. To not follow any path or dogma, but rather to find your own path in these things. If you like aspects of Hinduism, but you also like left-hand path black magic, find a way to integrate those two things. Call upon Kali. Realize that the spiritual beings of antiquity were neither good nor evil. They were forces of nature. They were archetypal. You could call upon a god for good or evil in almost every sense of the word. So don't think about things in a light and dark perspective. Don't think about things in a limiting way. Try to find ways to bring things in. And this is one reason why a lot of what I do resonates with the left-hand path, with chaos magic, and this is why I've developed my own eclectic styling, which is really talked about in my first book, which I mentioned earlier and talked about earlier. But, as a non-dualist, as a non-dualistic metaphysician, I believe that we are all the source, and we are all kind of you would call it a multiple personality of the source. We're all part of that breakup. So in other words, there's the source consciousness, and source consciousness begins to identify itself as smaller and smaller things, as less big and grand things. Instead of being the source, it is, well, I'm a god. That's lower than the source. That would be that first emanation. That would be that in Gnosticism. That would be the the demiurge, I guess you would call it. But you are really the source. And as you manifest these minds, these characters, these selves, as you manifest these things, you become them. So you are the source, pretending you're a mortal being. And this mortal being has limitations and weaknesses. You believe that this world around you is the real world, but it's only a figment. It's only an imaginary thing. That doesn't mean that nothing exists. That doesn't mean that the substance of reality is not real. Rather, what you think it is a figment of your imagination. So, if you pick up a basketball, you would call it a ball because it looks like a sphere, but it's not a sphere. The thing that a sphere is a spiritual concept. It is without any physicality to it. It's just this is a sphere. Whereas an object is made up of substance. So what happens is our minds collapse the reality around us from a form that's a platonic form, a true idealized form, and we look at our physical reality around us, we look at the substance, and we find a pattern in that substance that matches the idea of that form. We bring them together, and our minds project a dream upon our experience, which looks like the world we understand. And that's why no two people see it the same way. Your truth is your truth because of this, because you are a higher God being. You have the ability to manifest whatever you want. But when I say you, I don't mean your ego. I mean your higher self. Your ego is just another emanation of that higher self. It's almost like a Russian nesting doll. As soon as you take one off, there's another piece inside. The same thing happens if you start looking inward. You will find the further you go inward, the more layers there are to what you are, until you finally come down to one thing that you are, and that is consciousness. That is awareness. Awareness without anything else, not thoughts, not memories, nothing. You are consciousness when everything else is an extension of that consciousness. Everything else is something that consciousness observes and experiences, and it does so passively. This is why one of the most important lines in my first book, Become the Maelstrom, is you are not your thoughts, you're the space between your thoughts. This is a very Zen idea. And so I've identified something interesting about Lucifer as I understand him. Now, Lucifer is a being that, quite honestly, is mostly myth. In other words, the Christians misinterpreted something in a translation in the Bible and treated the word Lucifer as if it was meant to be a specific god or monster or demon or something, when really it was most likely talking about a king in antiquity that was being talked about in this Bible verse. And it really means light bringer. And the morning star, even, that symbolism was attributed even to Jesus. And this is why you get a lot of people conflating Lucifer and Jesus. And there's a lot of people who think these things, and they're not right or wrong. That's their path and their belief, and they're justified in it. However, I've identified Lucifer to be an archetype, and Lucifer is an archetype in the Jungian sense. He's an archetype in our collective conscious of human spirit, and he's probably universal to other beings as well, probably to other even beings on this planet, even beings maybe even in the universe besides us, if you believe that there is life out there. Lucifer represents the archetype of individualism, rebellion, and enlightenment. Enlightenment is the big one. Enlightenment is the understanding of who and what you truly are. In the story of Lucifer, we see that he is a being that is supposedly created by God. However, he rebels against that idea, and he says, no, I am like God. I am God-like. I am God. I have the powers of God. He recognizes, he wakes up. In a way, he is the Buddha of the West. He is that kind of character. He is a being who understands that he is not some insignificant little speck. He is that speck, but that speck is a magnificent blinding light because it is the source itself. He is the source. We are all the source. Their Christian God is the source. Jesus is the source. You're the source. Your dog is the source. Lucifer is the source. Now, Lucifer represents rebellion against that oppressive force that is present in every religion and in every belief that makes you feel inferior to other beliefs and gods and things like that. This is why I refuse to ever kneel and worship a god. I will never work with a spiritual being and put it above me. It is always beside me or below me. And when I say below me, I don't mean it is inferior to me. I mean below me in the sense that I command it. I have power over it, like I might have power over, this lighter that I use to light my incense with. But at the same time, that dominion it's mutual. So when I say I'm above it, that means in this particular situation, I control it. However, I'm limited by its own will and desire, am I not? I cannot just say, make fire now. I literally have to work with it and have it have its own choice in how to respond. I give it a choice, in a sense. So my dominion over it is only in the fact that I can compel it to do what I want, but it still must, of course, obey, must it not? And in that sense, everything is free. Everything has its own power to be its own God, including that lighter, including you. It may be a stretch of the imagination, but it's completely true. And in Zen, of course, if we go into Zen thinking more, which I'm not going to do here, it's a practice of enlightening yourself. It is a practice of quieting your mind, of closing your mind of conscious thought, and allowing yourself to meditate on what it means to be you. When you realize you are not your ego, you are not this story that you think you are literally the quietness between your thoughts. That is what you are. You're the eye. You're the all-seeing eye. That eye of providence that's used in so many occult symbols and the Illuminati. Well, that is you. You are that all-seeing eye. That is its really biggest meaning. And you have a light side and a shadow side. The light side is what you're more aware of, and the shadow side is what you're not really aware of. That part of you that's hidden from even yourself, the part behind the eye. And that is where the shadow comes in, and I talk about that a lot in my other book, but maybe we'll talk about my books in a minute, but that'd be very interesting to talk about.
What inspired you to write them? And do you have a favorite?
Okay, I did mention my books earlier on, but thank you for asking again about them. I do have 2 published books right now, and I have a lot more on the table. I have a major book, which I mentioned earlier, is Become the Maelstrom. It's a complete book of magic. I really recommend it. You can find it on Amazon. You can easily find it by putting in Become the Maelstrom. It's sold very well since I released it. It's got 50 reviews. I've had 1 negative, and the rest were all positive or neutral, so it's got like 4 3/4 stars, or however the highest you usually get on there. So it's doing very well, and it's sold very well. It's sold well enough that I could become self-employed. That book in particular is a complete work of magic for people of all skill levels to learn the way that I do things. You can use it and make it your own system, but really it's designed to give you the basics. So I teach you the methods of meditation, at least one of them. I teach you how to manipulate energy in a ritual. I teach you how to do divination and tarot. I teach you about metaphysical ideas like the ones I've talked about so far, but I do them in a neat package, so you don't have to master the Vedas and master Neoplatonism or master Hermetics. It's not quite a stand-in for the Kybalion and all these other cool books. I do recommend those as well. Don't limit yourself to my book, but you can use my book as a great jumping off point. Or if you're more advanced, you can understand what a more advanced practitioner thinks that might resonate with you and inspire you. And really the word inspiration is a big one. I want that book to inspire you to do your own practices, and it's a big book. It's a big book, both in dimension. It's about 160,000 words. It's a big full tome, and it only comprises a small portion of the things that I like to teach and talk about. But it's a great way to get started in magic, and I really recommend it. And enough with the sales pitch on that one. Let's move on to the second one. The second one is Shadownomicon. Now, Shadownomicon was my second work. And I'm not as proud about the editing and things in that one as I am about Become the Maelstrom, as I am self-published, so I will be doing later editions of all of these works. But that book in particular is a little smaller, and it is based upon my work in what I call the shadow current. Now, the shadow current is the current in which the shadow people are placed in the spectrum of the paranormal. So in my worldview, the shadow people are extensions and external manifestations of our Jungian shadow, our personal shadow and our collective shadow. And humanity's collective shadow is a big part of that conversation about guilt we just had. A lot of things that we worry about with guilt are a product of our personal shadow, but also our collective shadow. We're guilty of things because society tells us to be guilty of them. They tell us to be ashamed of our improprieties, and they tell us to be ashamed of things. Well, working with shadow people is really kind of like putting shadow work on hard mode, but it's actually, for more advanced people, it's the only real way to get progress. You need to be confronted by your inner shadow. You need to see that shadow vividly in your mind's eye, and you need to know what it represents, and you need it to tell you what it is about. What does it represent in you? You can also learn to master that shadow and have it manifest your will for you. Not unlike another spirit. These things are real beings. They are egregoric spirits that are manifest, budded off parts of humanity. They are the oldest, perhaps, spirits in human knowledge. In fact, I would actually suggest, and some people in the occult don't like to hear this, but some applaud it, that humanity's shadow, our collective shadow, the Jungian shadow, the spiritual shadow of the shadow people, the shadow current itself, is perhaps the most powerful spiritual force in our world. However, we do not know about it because we hide from it, and we hide it from ourselves. So the Jungian shadow is an idea that talks about the impulses behind your motivations, the things that you don't think about, the things that you're afraid to think about, the things you're ashamed of, the things you're guilty of. Everybody acts in ways that are based upon fear and loathing and desperation, and sometimes things we're ashamed of. Not to get too nitty-gritty, but we all know that we all have habits and impulses that we're ashamed of, we don't like to talk about. We like to hide them from the world. And this makes them stronger, because without putting those things in the light and recognizing that they're part of what we are, the more we try to hide them and be ashamed of them, the more subtle control they have over our actions. This is a great source of things like addiction, at least initially, before the chemical reasons step in. This is a great reason why we treat people the way we do, why we make some of the mistakes we make, where we abuse people in our lives and things of that nature, make ourselves weaker. A lot of it has to do with our own shadow. And working with your own shadow is very important. And so Shadownomicon is both a grimoire about the shadow people themselves, their origins, what I think they are, as well as a number of shadow beings which I have channeled and created work for that you can interact with. I've created a complete path working, and it is more of a path working than my other book, to begin a working with the being which I call Legion, which was mentioned in the Bible. It's maybe not that exact being, because I think that's more of a parable, but the being took that name for itself. And upon further investigation with other occultists, they've identified Legion to probably be an incarnation of the being Karanzan that was talked about in many other occult sources. Most notably, I believe, would be Liber Null, though I've never read it, but I do believe there's a lot of conversation about Karanzan. It's a very similar being to Karanzan. It is kind of like the last demon you have to face to full ascension. You have to integrate the full self, and that is comprised of so many other spiritual beings, so many other shadows that you must become to terms with. And there's a great load of work and gnosis that went into that book. You will identify and learn about a whole bunch of other spirits that can work with you and against you. This is definitely a dangerous working. I don't recommend it for beginners. Rather, this is an informative text, and if you want to work with them after you've read it, you're welcome to try, but I don't recommend it for beginners. Reading it is fine for anybody, any skill level. If you're interested, it will help you. It will definitely awaken you to some of your own issues and things in life and help you out. But don't practice the magic that I put in there. Don't practice the communion ritual. Don't get acquainted with them formally until you're doing a little bit better, especially in magic. Make sure that you have at least a year or so of active practitioner magic under your belt, so that you know how to manifest spirits, you know how to banish, you know how to clear, you know how to ground yourself in the event of a dangerous entity entering your space, because these beings are the darkest parts of you and they emanate from you, and it's very impossible nearly to really banish them forever. You can only awaken them and manifest them, and then once that happens, you've got to integrate them. That's the only way to deal with them. And until you've integrated them, you got to watch out. So you've got to be prepared. You've got to be able to handle the challenges of working with the shadow people before you try. So that book can also be found on Amazon under the title Shadownomicon. My next book, which will probably be out not long after this interview, hopefully, I'm doing the final writing and then probably a couple weeks of editing and finishing touches, is going to be a book on vampire magic and vampire metaphysics, which I think will be, hopefully not too much of a Me Too title, but it's one that I felt needed to be done with my own unique perspective, and it will follow a very similar format that I like to use, where I do a lot of talking and essay writing, and then I tell you how to use the things that I talk about with rituals and with symbols and things like that. So hopefully you'll find that useful if you're interested in that current, which I think a lot of people are, especially in the left-hand path, the black magic community. Though it's not necessarily like a focus of that group, there's a lot of people who are interested. So hopefully you'll find that useful. I have not decided what the title is, so if you're not sure, try to follow me wherever you can find me, and it will come out soon.
Very interesting, and I'm excited for your upcoming work. Can you share where individuals can find your works, where they can read your blogs and your entries? Do you have a website, and what services do you offer, and how can they contact you?
Okay, it's actually not hard to contact me at all, depending upon what you like to use. I am very active on Facebook. I have a Facebook community. Become the Maelstrom is the name of the group. Make sure you answer the questions if you try to join it, but I am very easygoing about it. I do restrict what posts can be up, because some people like to troll. I mean, it is left-hand path magic after all, and you get some unsavory people from time to time. But if you make a post and it's a good one, I will always approve it, and there's a lot of good conversations that happen. It's sort of my fan group, but I want people to come in there and feel like they can just talk about magic too. too. So it's not all about me in there. You can, of course, check me out just on regular Facebook. You can find my profile easily, and I have a public page as well. And you can follow me on any of those, especially if my friend requests are full. Just go ahead and follow me in the meantime. I often don't accept friend requests. However, I do try to respond to most attempts to contact me through Messenger if you're attempting to do that. It may take me a little while, though, because sometimes I don't want to say 100 a day, but I can get several dozen a day for sure, and some of them are long conversations I got to deal with. However, you can go to www.mindtheshadows.com. That is my blog/website, and there's content on there going back to when I began. Some of it's unpolished and messy, so you get to see where I came from. You get to criticize what I started doing, and you get to see where I'm at now. You get to see what I believe in now. It's not safe for minors. It's not safe for people who are easily triggered by things. However, you will find a lot of useful stuff in there that I think will help promote your growth in spirituality and magic, and just some cool stories that I tell as well. But in there, you can also find a page that tells you about my services and anything that you want. If you want me to do a ritual for you, you want to do a mentorship program, you want to talk to me in consultation, I'm fine with doing that, but I do require that any major working requires a consultation first, a face-to-face on Skype. I will sometimes do a tarot reading. I will sometimes just do a regular reading where I read you as a person. Once I feel our energies are compatible and your need is justified, I will consider doing a paid ritual. My prices vary. I do have some affordable rituals on there, but I don't make my money doing that. That is just so that I can offer a service to stay in practice, because sometimes I don't know what to do my own work for because I feel so content in life already. So having things that I can do for others gives me a chance to grow my own practice and master my own art that much better. And so I do offer them at pretty reasonable rates, especially my affordable spells, which are for more generic purposes. It doesn't require as much of a reading about you. It doesn't require that I put too much of my own essence into them. I'm literally just petitioning a spirit on your behalf or doing a candle spell or something on your behalf. And I get good results that way, and it's very useful, and so far I've been doing very well with it, and I've had a lot of people that have really benefited, and it makes me really happy. But I really live for doing consults. I like analyzing people. I like doing readings on people. I like helping people. So if you want my help, go there. My email address is listed on all of my stuff, and that's how a lot of my work comes to me. People will email me, they'll find me on Facebook, and so on. And of course, you can reach me on YouTube. You can always find my channel. I put out at least one video plus one stream a week. I try to sometimes put out more. For a while there, I was putting out 2 or 3, but they were shorter, and I couldn't keep up with that caseload. Eventually, you don't burn out, but you got to space it out. Otherwise, it kinds of becomes, quantity instead of quality. So, I want to do quality too. So hopefully you enjoy my content on there, and that's really it. So if you really want to get a hold of me, that's the easiest ways to do it.
It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here, and an honor. And I truly appreciate your time.
And again, Maggie, thank you so much for having me on.
So for those of you who are interested in finding out more about D.H. Thorn, about his YouTube channel, his blog, and where you can acquire his books, I will leave all of that in the description below, and I highly recommend that you check them out. Well, I hope that you enjoyed watching this interview as much as I enjoyed engaging in it with D.H. Thorn. And until next time, I wish you dark and wild